a remarkable shift is unfolding as an increasing number of Russian soldiers rise against government orders, refusing to participate in military campaigns. Since 2022, over 100,000 soldiers have reportedly defied deployment orders, despite threats of execution or imprisonment. This defiance isn't confined to a select few. It spans regions, military ranks, and demographics, even fostering underground networks that support those who choose not to fight. Such resistance signals a profound change in how Russian society perceives military service and the wars waged by their government. Is this the beginning of a crack in the loyalty of Russia's armed forces? Or is it merely a fleeting act of dissent that won't alter the bigger picture? And what about you? Do you think these Russian soldiers who refuse to fight courageous heroes or traitors to their nation? Defiance within the ranks of the Russian military has reached extraordinary levels, reflecting a growing crisis of morale and dissent among soldiers. Russian military courts are now handling an astonishing number of cases, with nearly 100 convictions being processed each week for soldiers refusing to follow combat orders. Since September 2022, over 10,000 soldiers have faced prosecution for declining participation in military operations, highlighting the widespread resistance within the armed forces. This refusal to deploy takes several forms. Unauthorized abandonment of military units accounts for most cases, with 9,059 soldiers prosecuted for such actions. Additionally, 627 soldiers have been charged with failing to comply with direct orders, while 339 have been accused of outright desertion. In total, criminal courts have already sentenced 8,594 soldiers for acts of combat refusal. This surge in resistance is a sharp departure from pre-conflict norms when cases of evasion were relatively rare. Before the current conflict, annual convictions for such offenses averaged around 600. The dramatic rise underscores a growing unwillingness among Russian soldiers to engage in the war, pointing to deeper issues of discontent and opposition within the ranks. Unit-level resistance has emerged as a significant challenge for military leadership. In early 2023, entire units began refusing deployment orders, with commanders struggling to maintain control over their forces. The situation intensified following the Wagner Group's mutiny, with multiple units expressing solidarity with fellow soldiers who refused combat duties. Russian military law currently provides some protection for resistors, as troops who refuse to fight can face dismissal, but avoid prosecution under the current special military operation status. However, authorities have responded with increasingly harsh measures, including threats of imprisonment and physical intimidation. Perhaps most significantly, resistance has spread to the officer corps. Major General Ivan Popov's dismissal for criticizing senior military commanders represents a watershed moment in military defiance. His leaked audio recording, which blasted leadership for insufficient support to frontline forces, revealed deep-seated dissatisfaction among senior officers. The officer corps opposition has created what military analysts describe as deepening fault lines within the Russian armed forces. Senior commanders increasingly voice concerns about inadequate support, poor strategic planning, and mounting casualties. This high-level resistance has particularly intensified following battlefield setbacks, with multiple high-ranking officers being detained for suspected disloyalty. Military families have joined the resistance movement, forming support networks for soldiers refusing deployment. These groups have established communication channels through platforms like Telegram, where membership in resistance support groups has grown from 200 to over 1,000 members. Regional resistance to Russia's military campaigns reveals stark geographical and demographic patterns, with significant variations between urban centers and rural areas. The impact of these patterns has created unprecedented challenges for military recruitment and regional stability. A sharp divide has emerged between urban and rural areas in their attitudes toward Russia's ongoing military operations, highlighting contrasting perspectives shaped by access to information and social dynamics. In major urban centers like Moscow and St. Petersburg, only 26% of residents express support for the war, a stark contrast to the 40% support observed in rural regions. This disparity appears closely linked to differences in information availability. While urban populations often have diverse media access, including independent outlets and internet-based resources, rural communities frequently rely on state television due to restricted internet connectivity. This limited access fosters a narrative shaped by government propaganda, influencing higher levels of support in smaller towns and remote areas. Ethnic minorities, meanwhile, have faced disproportionate targeting in military recruitment efforts, fueling intense resistance and protests. In regions like Buryatia and Yakutia, mass conscription has heavily impacted indigenous populations, drawing accusations of systemic discrimination. Similarly, in Crimea, Crimean Tatars, who constitute roughly 15% of the population, account for an alarming 50% of local conscripts, revealing the unequal burden placed on minority communities. Resistance to these practices has been particularly pronounced in Dagestan, where widespread protests erupted. Entire villages have mobilized against conscription, with one community of 7,000 people blocking access roads in protest after 110 residents were called to serve. These acts of defiance underscore the deep frustration and resentment brewing in many minority regions. The economic repercussions of these tensions are also being felt unevenly across Russia's regions, with significant declines in productivity adding to the strain. Resource-rich areas saw GDP shrink by 2.1% in 2022, reflecting the broader economic impact of the war. Manufacturing-dependent regions have suffered even greater setbacks. For instance, Kaluga experienced a staggering 29.4% drop in its manufacturing index, while Perm-Krai reported a 6.9% decline, and the Kirov region endured a 25.4% decrease in industrial output. The economic disparity between regions has intensified resistance patterns. While Moscow residents saw only a 2% decline in real incomes, peripheral regions suffered significantly greater losses. Kaluga region, 8.4%, Kaliningrad, 7.9%, and Perm territory, 5.6%. These economic pressures have fueled growing opposition to military recruitment, particularly in regions where alternative employment opportunities are scarce. The resistance movement has gained particular strength in regions where military service previously offered economic stability. However, with declining military wages and increasing risks, even traditionally compliant regions now show signs of organized opposition. Local authorities struggle to maintain control, especially in areas where economic hardship intersects with ethnic-minority populations. Underground resistance networks have emerged as crucial lifelines for Russian soldiers seeking to avoid combat deployment, with over 20,000 activists facing government repression for anti-war activities. These networks operate through sophisticated digital channels and international support systems. Telegram has emerged as a crucial tool for organizing and coordinating resistance against Russia's military actions, serving as a platform where uncensored information about the conflict is widely shared. An estimated 71% of war-related groups on Telegram are dedicated to disseminating unedited details about military operations, human rights violations of the war. With its extensive reach, connecting to approximately 61% of the Russian population, Telegram has become an indispensable medium for spreading anti-war messages and fostering collective action. Resistance groups utilize the platform to share vital updates about military activities, organize legal assistance for deserters, and document violations of human rights. Beyond information dissemination, Telegram also facilitates the establishment of support networks for soldiers' families, offering them critical resources and solidarity. This decentralized flow of information empowers activists and ordinary citizens alike, enabling them to bypass state-controlled media and access a broader, uncensored view of the conflict. The need for secure communication has driven resistance movements to adopt highly encrypted and protected methods to ensure safety and confidentiality. The Congress of Anti-War Initiatives, which unites over 150 organizations across 30 countries, exemplifies the scale and sophistication of these efforts. Resistance groups have implemented strict security protocols, relying on encrypted platforms for various purposes. Telegram's secret chats feature, for example, is widely used for private, end-to-end encrypted messaging, while Signal provides maximum security for group coordination. Encrypted email services are also employed for sharing sensitive documents, ensuring a high level of confidentiality. These encrypted networks are the backbone of the resistance, enabling activists to operate with greater confidence despite the risks. By employing advanced communication tools and fostering international collaboration, resistance movements continue to challenge the Kremlin's control, amplifying their efforts to resist the war and advocate for change on a global scale. International support networks have established a significant presence, particularly in European countries. The Berlin Platform of Anti-War Initiatives includes over 60 projects, while Russian America for Democracy in Russia unites 18 communities across the United States. These networks provide crucial services. The Free Russians Global Coalition, formed in July 2022, coordinates resistance activities across borders. Their work has resulted in tangible support, including raising €65,000 for conscientious objectors and deserters. The movement has expanded to include specialized support groups in multiple countries, with notable hubs in Prague, Miami, and Washington, D.C. These networks have proven particularly effective in supporting military personnel seeking to avoid combat. One support organization reportedly helped enough soldiers escape mobilization to understaff several infantry battalions. The resistance movement maintains strict operational security, with most communities managed by elected boards averaging 10 individuals. The effectiveness of these networks is evident in their reach and impact. Over 21,000 individuals received support for anti-war activities in 2022 alone, while underground workshops and printing houses continue to operate within Russia, despite increased government surveillance. The Committee of Soldiers' Mothers has emerged as a powerful force challenging military authorities, continuing a tradition of resistance that dates back to the Soviet-Afghan War. Founded as one of the first independent grassroots organizations in the Soviet Union, the committee has evolved into a significant opposition voice against current military operations. The movement has gained renewed momentum, with over 30 women staging protests at Communist Party rallies in Moscow. Their demands focus on ending indefinite deployments, with signs declaring it's time for the mobilized to go home and no to endless mobilization. The protests have spread across multiple regions, including Bashkortostan and Dagestan, where families increasingly challenge military authorities. Family support networks opposing the war have witnessed a significant expansion, primarily driven by the reach and accessibility of social media platforms, with Telegram playing a central role. Among these, the Put Domoy, the Way Home channel has emerged as a powerful hub for resistance, amassing a following of over 39,000 users. This platform has become a critical space for coordinating nationwide efforts, enabling families and activists to share information, organize protests, and provide mutual aid. The network extends across regional coordination groups within Russia and cross-border support systems, linking domestic efforts with international solidarity movements. The global reach of these networks is evidenced by their activities in various countries, where support centers have taken on specialized roles. In Prague, the movement has orchestrated large-scale demonstrations, including a march involving 5,000 participants, showcasing the scale of public dissent. In Miami, activists focus on collecting essential equipment and resources to aid families and deserters. Meanwhile, Minneapolis has become a hub for refugee support, assisting those who have fled Russia due to the conflict or fear of conscription. These international collaborations highlight the transnational nature of the resistance and its ability to mobilize resources and attention on a global stage. In parallel, legal defense initiatives have gained momentum as families grapple with the complexities of military regulations and seek justice for their loved ones. One prominent example is the Council of Mothers and Wives, established in Samara, which has boldly confronted authorities over the issue of soldiers who have gone missing during the conflict. This group has taken a proactive approach to advocacy, meticulously documenting rights violations, securing legal representation for affected families, and pressing for broader medical exemptions to shield individuals from conscription. The movement maintains a delicate balance, framing itself as non-political while effectively challenging military policies. Despite facing increasing pressure, including being labeled as foreign agents, these family networks continue to expand their influence, with some groups raising substantial funds for legal defense and support services. Recent developments show the movement's growing impact, as evidenced by the Kremlin's careful approach to these protests. Officials have been instructed to maintain contact with the women and address their concerns, marking a significant shift in official response to family-led resistance. Economic pressures have become a critical force driving resistance to Russia's military efforts, as the country grapples with severe financial strain and declining living standards. In 2023, inflation surged to an alarming 9.2%, significantly eroding household purchasing power and intensifying economic hardships. In response, the Russian central bank implemented drastic measures, raising interest rates to a staggering 19%, signaling the depth of the financial challenges facing the nation. This monetary tightening has added to the burden on businesses and individuals, further fueling discontent. The redirection of national resources toward military expenditures has profoundly disrupted civilian life. Defense spending now accounts for an unprecedented 40% of the federal budget, overshadowing investments in essential social services and infrastructure. This militarized economy has created widespread economic distortions. Consumer spending, a key indicator of household confidence and financial stability, dropped by 2% in 2022. Meanwhile, real wages in resource-dependent regions fell by 2.4%, exacerbating regional disparities and fueling dissatisfaction among workers. Social spending, which directly affects public health, education, and welfare, has faced reductions for the third consecutive year, leaving many citizens with fewer safety nets in a time of economic uncertainty. The labor market has also been thrown into disarray, presenting a paradoxical situation. Official unemployment rates have fallen to a historic low of 2.3%, but this figure masks deep structural issues. The artificially tight labor market is driven by several factors. Military recruitment has absorbed between 300,000 and 500,000 individuals, removing a significant portion of the workforce. Emigration has surged, with over 668,000 people leaving Russia in 2022 alone, including a staggering 400,000 skilled professionals, exacerbating the country's ongoing brain drain. This exodus of talent and labor has left gaps in critical industries, undermining productivity and innovation. The manufacturing sector has been particularly affected by these disruptions. While war-related industries have experienced a 60% surge in production, civilian sectors have stagnated, unable to compete for resources and workers. The labor shortages have led to widespread hiring challenges, with 82.8% of companies reporting difficulties in attracting employees. This imbalance has triggered wage inflation, driving up costs for businesses without corresponding increases in productivity, further straining the economy. Together, these economic dynamics paint a picture of a nation under immense pressure, with the costs of prolonged military engagement rippling through every aspect of society. The growing financial burdens on ordinary citizens, coupled with systemic disruptions to industries and labor markets, are fostering deeper resentment and resistance, both within the workforce and across broader segments of the population. Economic decline varies significantly across regions, creating new patterns of instability. Resource-rich regions show contrasting outcomes. The Khanty-Mansi Okrug experienced income growth of 6.9%, while manufacturing-focused regions suffered severe declines. The Kaluga region saw real incomes fall by 8.4%, and the Kaliningrad exclave experienced a 7.9% decrease. Military-industrial regions have benefited from increased government spending, while regions focused on civilian production face severe economic pressure. The federal government maintains relatively small deficits of approximately 2% of GDP, but this masks deeper structural problems in the economy. Energy export revenues, which traditionally supported the economy, have declined sharply by almost 40% in 2023. This decline, combined with the immobilization of approximately USD 280 billion in Russian reserves, has created unprecedented economic strain on regions dependent on civilian production. The economic pressure has particularly affected younger workers, with employment among those under 35 dropping by 1.3 million in 2022. This demographic shift, combined with declining productivity in civilian sectors, has created a self-reinforcing cycle of economic deterioration that fuels military resistance. Young Russians are mounting significant opposition to military operations, with students and youth organizations emerging as key drivers of resistance. Among Russians under 30 years old living in large cities with higher education, over 80% oppose the war. Academic institutions have become critical hubs of resistance to the war, with students at the forefront of protests despite the risk of severe reprisals. Across Russia, universities have responded harshly to anti-war activities, expelling hundreds of students for their involvement. St. Petersburg State University alone has expelled 13 students for participating in protests, signaling the lengths to which authorities will go to suppress dissent. However, these punitive measures have not deterred student opposition, which continues to manifest in various forms. On campuses, demonstrations and silent protests serve as visible acts of defiance, while anti-war petitions and open letters provide a platform for students to voice their objections publicly. Underground study groups and workshops have also emerged, offering safe spaces for critical discussions and the exchange of ideas. To support those targeted by authorities, students have organized legal defense networks to assist individuals expelled for their activism. One of the most prominent movements to arise is the Students Against War Initiative, which uses Telegram to coordinate resistance efforts across universities nationwide. Their inaugural campaign encouraged students to wear anti-war symbols during classes as a subtle yet powerful act of protest. Despite the ever-present risk of expulsion, these symbolic gestures have galvanized young people and strengthened their resolve to oppose the conflict. Youth activists have also developed innovative digital strategies to sustain their resistance. The feminist anti-war resistance group, boasting 35,000 followers on Telegram, has become a leading force in organizing creative opposition. This group, along with other youth-led initiatives, employs a variety of secure communication platforms, such as Telegram for coordination and Signal for encrypted messaging, to maintain the integrity of their networks. These tools enable activists to connect across regions and amplify their efforts, despite the state's attempts to curtail their activities. In addition to digital coordination, activists have turned to underground publishing to spread their message. Anti-war postcards disguised as greeting cards circulate widely, allowing individuals to express dissent subtly in environments hostile to overt activism. The group also produces Zhenskaya Pravda, Women's Truth, a cleverly disguised newspaper modeled after traditional local publications. By mirroring familiar formats, the publication aims to reach apolitical audiences who might otherwise remain indifferent to the conflict, thereby expanding the movement's influence. Through these combined efforts, both on campuses and in digital spaces, students and young activists have demonstrated remarkable resilience and creativity in opposing the war. Their determination not only underscores the growing discontent among Russia's youth but also highlights the critical role of academic institutions as battlegrounds for freedom of expression and political resistance. Generation Z demonstrates distinctly different values from previous generations, showing strong resistance to military operations. Recent polls indicate that 51% of those under 30 oppose the war, while only 38% support it. This generation's resistance is characterized by young Russians increasingly prioritizing self-development and individualism, values that directly conflict with military service. Among those aged 18 to 24, 79% favor immediate peace negotiations, marking a significant generational divide from older Russians, where 57% of those over 60 support continued military operations. The Kremlin's response includes intensified propaganda efforts in schools and universities, though these campaigns show minimal effectiveness among youth. Despite facing potential imprisonment and academic expulsion, student activists continue organizing through encrypted channels and underground networks. University administrators actively monitor social media for anti-war sentiment, with some institutions demanding students remove anti-patriotic posts. The persecution has led many student activists to seek refuge abroad, while others maintain resistance through anonymous digital platforms and underground printing operations. This youth-led resistance movement represents a fundamental challenge to military recruitment efforts, as young Russians increasingly refuse to participate in combat operations. Their opposition, rooted in values of personal freedom and international connectivity, signals a growing generational divide in Russian society's approach to military service and national identity. Russian opposition networks have established a significant international presence, with protest diaspora organizations operating in 44 countries. These networks provide crucial support for soldiers refusing combat deployment and activists facing persecution. The Russian protest diaspora has become an influential and dynamic force in the global resistance against the war, with a network of 108 organized groups actively operating in major cities around the world. These diaspora groups have established themselves as a vital component of the anti-war movement, utilizing their positions abroad to amplify their voices, support those affected by the conflict, and foster a sense of solidarity among displaced Russians and their allies. One of the most visible aspects of the diaspora's activities is their commitment to organizing regular global protest actions. These demonstrations take place in prominent international cities, drawing attention to the war and its consequences while providing a platform for the Russian opposition to challenge the Kremlin's narrative. By gathering in front of embassies, government buildings, and public squares, the diaspora ensures that the world does not forget the human cost of the conflict. Beyond protests, these groups also focus on community-building events, fostering connections among Russians living abroad and creating a network of mutual support. These events often include discussions, workshops, and cultural gatherings that help maintain a sense of identity and shared purpose within the diaspora. In addition, many of these organizations collect aid for refugees, providing essential supplies and resources to those who have fled the war, ensuring that their immediate needs are met as they rebuild their lives in foreign lands. Legal support for political prisoners is another critical aspect of the diaspora's mission. By raising funds, advocating for international attention, and connecting families with legal representation, these groups play an essential role in the ongoing fight for justice for those imprisoned for their anti-war stance. Educational initiatives are equally important as they seek to counter disinformation by disseminating accurate information about the war and fostering critical discussions on its causes, consequences, and potential resolutions. Cultural activities also feature prominently in the diaspora's efforts, serving as a bridge between activism and public engagement. Through art exhibitions, film screenings, poetry readings, and music performances, the diaspora not only preserves the rich cultural heritage of Russia, but also uses these events to promote the values of peace and human rights. These cultural expressions resonate deeply, offering a powerful counter-narrative to the militarized rhetoric emanating from Moscow. Together, these diverse efforts reflect the resilience and determination of the Russian protest diaspora. By leveraging their international presence and collective energy, they have created a formidable movement that not only supports those affected by the war, but also keeps the fight for peace and justice alive on a global scale. Prague has emerged as a central hub, organizing a march of 5,000 people, while Miami and Washington, D.C. focus on equipment collection and refugee support. The Congress of Anti-War Initiatives in Brussels, supported by the European Union and German Foreign Ministry, brought together 250 Russian citizens actively opposing the invasion. International support networks have developed into highly organized and effective systems, offering a wide range of assistance to individuals seeking to escape military service and persecution for their opposition to the war. These networks use sophisticated communication and logistical strategies to ensure their activities are both impactful and secure. Among the key players in this ecosystem is the Defense Zone Group, a small yet highly effective organization comprised of 10 members working both within Russia and abroad. Their primary focus is on providing legal support to anti-war activists, helping them navigate complex legal challenges and secure their rights amid growing repression. Several other prominent organizations form the backbone of these international support networks, each specializing in critical areas of assistance. Kovcheg, for instance, plays a pivotal role in establishing and maintaining diaspora infrastructure across multiple countries. By creating safe spaces and resource hubs for Russian immigrants, Kovcheg ensures that those fleeing the conflict or conscription have access to the tools they need to settle and rebuild their lives. Solidarity Zone focuses on legal aid, offering cross-border assistance to individuals facing legal persecution for their anti-war stance. This organization provides vital resources, including legal consultations, representation, and advocacy, ensuring that those targeted by the state have a fighting chance in court and access to justice. Helpdesk Media operates as an essential information-sharing platform, leveraging its international reach to disseminate accurate and timely updates. The organization counters disinformation while equipping activists and immigrants with practical advice on navigating their new environments or dealing with challenges posed by the Russian state. Through its expansive communication channels, Helpdesk Media connects individuals to crucial resources and allies. Free Russians Global serves as a coordination hub, linking 18 different communities worldwide to create a unified and cohesive network. By facilitating collaboration among dispersed groups, Free Russians Global amplifies the impact of their collective efforts, allowing them to organize large-scale campaigns, share resources, and maintain consistent messaging across borders. Together, these organizations represent a robust and interconnected system of support. They provide a lifeline to those fleeing conscription, persecution, or war while also fostering solidarity among the global Russian diaspora. Through legal aid, infrastructure building, information dissemination, and cross-border coordination, these networks play an indispensable role in opposing the conflict and advocating for the rights of those affected by it. Digital platforms have become crucial for securing information flow between opposition groups. The Berlin Platform of Anti-War Initiatives unites over 60 projects, while Russian America for Democracy in Russia coordinates 18 communities across the United States. These networks employ sophisticated communication strategies to maintain security and effectiveness. Research indicates significant bot activities attempting to manipulate opposition narratives on social media, prompting resistance groups to develop secure communication protocols. International organizations like Amnesty International have mobilized supporters from more than 20 countries to show solidarity with imprisoned protesters. The movement has gained particular momentum in European nations, where activists maintain regular contact with state officials to advocate for political prisoners and draft dodgers. The effectiveness of these networks is evident in their humanitarian impact. The Warmth for Ukraine initiative raised $460,000 for essential equipment, while Russians for Ukraine provide continuous assistance at the Polish-Ukrainian border. These achievements demonstrate the growing capacity of international support networks to facilitate meaningful resistance against military operations. Recent developments show increased coordination between diaspora communities and local civil society organizations, particularly in Germany. This collaboration has enhanced the network's ability to provide comprehensive support, from legal assistance to psychological counseling for those fleeing military service. Current patterns of military resistance in Russia mirror historical precedents, particularly the Soviet-Afghan War period when widespread refusal to fight emerged among Soviet forces. The parallels between past and present resistance movements reveal crucial insights into the evolution of military opposition in Russia. The Soviet-Afghan War 1979–1989 stands as a significant chapter in the history of military resistance, illustrating the far-reaching consequences of prolonged conflict. By 1981, the war had created the largest refugee crisis in the world, with millions fleeing primarily to Pakistan and Iran to escape the violence. As the war dragged on, internal resistance within Soviet forces intensified, highlighting cracks in the military structure. Desertion became rampant, with 55% of soldiers and 40% of units reportedly abandoning their posts. This internal dissent was mirrored by civilian protests, such as the Mothers' Movement, which would later evolve into the influential Committee of Soldiers' Mothers. While urban opposition during the Soviet-Afghan War was limited to a few cities, the emergence of nationwide resistance networks in modern conflicts reflects an evolution in how opposition organizes and communicates. To address these challenges, Soviet military leadership implemented three major strategic shifts in an attempt to reverse their failing position. First, they redirected their focus from combating rural insurgencies to attempting control over urban centers. Second, they sought to replace unpopular government leadership in Afghanistan with figures perceived as more acceptable to the public. Lastly, efforts were made to develop and empower local forces to bear the brunt of the fighting, alleviating the strain on Soviet troops. Despite these adjustments, the war ultimately became a quagmire, contributing to the eventual collapse of the Soviet Union. The dissolution of the USSR marked a turning point for resistance movements. Independent media and the rise of civil society organizations provided new platforms for opposing military policies. The Committee of Soldiers' Mothers, established during this era, emerged as a pioneering grassroots organization that directly challenged the military's authority, advocating for the rights of conscripts and exposing abuses. Striking parallels can be drawn between the Soviet-Afghan War and Russia's current conflicts. In 2022 alone, over 21,000 individuals faced penalties for anti-war actions, and at least 14,906 were detained during the first 3 weeks of the Ukraine invasion. Prominent activists have also voiced their dissent, with over 150 signing an open letter titled, "If Only Their Eyes, No War." These patterns echo past resistance movements, underscoring how opposition grows in response to the failures of military campaigns. Historical resistance offers critical lessons for understanding contemporary dissent. The Soviet experience in Afghanistan demonstrated that resistance gains momentum when three key factors align. First, strategic failures such as an inability to control rural territories, rising casualty rates, and declining public support undermine military operations. Second, economic pressures manifested in the Soviet Union's struggle to sustain military expenditures create tensions between funding the military and addressing civilian needs. Modern Russia faces similar constraints, with sanctions and resource allocation conflicts adding to the strain. Finally, international isolation plays a pivotal role. Just as the Soviet Union faced mounting diplomatic pressure during the Afghan War, Russia today contends with unprecedented sanctions and global condemnation, further eroding morale within its ranks. The current resistance movement shows remarkable similarities to historical patterns. The feminist anti-war resistance campaign launched one of the first organized opposition movements, echoing the role of the Committee of Soldiers' Mothers during the Soviet-Afghan War. Their manifesto explicitly connects current military policies to historical patterns of gender inequality and human rights violations. Recent developments demonstrate how historical lessons influence modern resistance strategies. The Berlin Platform of Anti-War Initiatives, uniting over 60 projects, employs tactics refined during post-Soviet protest movements. These include horizontal leadership structures, decentralized organization, and sophisticated use of digital communications. The success of contemporary resistance movements is deeply rooted in lessons drawn from historical struggles. Modern activists have refined their strategies by building on the foundations laid by past efforts. One critical area of advancement is information dissemination. While Soviet-era protesters relied on samizdat, clandestine, hand-circulated publications that reached only a limited audience, today's resistance groups leverage encrypted digital platforms to broadcast their messages to millions. This technological leap has enabled activists to bypass state-controlled media and communicate directly with a global audience. Another significant evolution lies in the scope of international coordination. Modern resistance networks operate across 44 countries, creating a vast, interconnected system of support and advocacy. This level of global reach far surpasses the capabilities of Soviet-era movements, which were largely confined to national or regional efforts. The ability to mobilize resources, organize protests, and amplify messages on an international scale has become a cornerstone of contemporary activism. Legal support systems have also undergone substantial development. Contemporary resistance groups offer comprehensive legal aid to those targeted for their opposition, drawing from frameworks established during the post-Soviet era. These systems provide activists with the tools to navigate complex legal challenges, protect their rights, and maintain the momentum of their movements. The historical parallels extend to military family protests. During the Soviet-Afghan War, mothers' movements emerged as powerful voices against military operations. Today, similar family-based resistance groups have formed, with over 21,000 Russians facing repression for anti-war activities. These modern movements benefit from established protest infrastructures and international support networks that their Soviet-era counterparts lack. Current resistance movements demonstrate a sophisticated understanding of historical lessons. The Russian Volunteer Corps and Freedom of Russia Legion represent the evolution of resistance tactics, combining elements from Soviet-era opposition with modern organizational methods. Their effectiveness stems from applying historical lessons about maintaining operational security while building broad support networks. The resistance patterns show remarkable consistency across different historical periods. During the Soviet-Afghan War, desertion rates reached 55%, while current estimates indicate similar levels of military opposition. This historical continuity suggests deeply rooted patterns in how Russian society responds to prolonged military conflicts. Russian military resistance represents a transformative moment in the nation's history, matching or exceeding the scale of opposition seen during the Soviet-Afghan War. Military defiance spans across ranks, regions, and demographic groups, with over 100,000 soldiers actively resisting deployment orders since 2022. Underground networks, family support systems, and international organizations provide crucial assistance to those refusing combat duties. Economic pressures fuel this resistance movement, as military spending consumes 40% of the federal budget while civilian sectors face a decline. Young Russians lead significant opposition efforts, with 80% of educated urban youth rejecting military operations. These resistance patterns mirror historical precedents, suggesting deep-rooted societal resistance to prolonged military conflicts. Regional variations reveal stark urban-rural divides and disproportionate impacts on ethnic minorities. Support networks operate through sophisticated digital channels, connecting activists across 44 countries and providing essential resources for resistors. Military families maintain powerful opposition through organizations like the Committee of Soldiers' Mothers, continuing a tradition of resistance dating back to Soviet times. This widespread resistance movement signals fundamental changes in Russian society's relationship with military service and national identity. The combination of economic strain, youth opposition, and international support networks creates unprecedented challenges for military recruitment and deployment. If you support Ukraine to win this war, please comment number 1 in the comment section below to let us know. Thanks for watching.